Hello, this is Joseph Holbrook. I am the professor of history and religion at Latin American and Caribbean Center. And today I'm beginning our last two videos of week 16 in our overview of Christianity in the late 20th century and into the 21st. My name is Joseph Holbrook, and we've been reviewing the history of Christianity over 2,000 years, and we will conclude this series with Christian growth in China, Korea, and Africa, and the decline of Christianity in the Middle East. This course is a core required introduction for our 15-credit certificate in Christian Studies, which is being offered in the fall of 2022 in the Religious Studies Department at Florida International University in Miami, Florida. We will conclude with an overview of the shift of Christianity from the United States and Europe to the non-Western global South. So let's jump into our notes. Our outline today, actually today and next week, we will be going over the decline of Arab Christianity in the Middle East, the surprising transformation of Korea, the resurgence of Christianity in China, and post-colonial Christianity in Africa. And then in our next video, we'll talk about the rise of Pentecostalism in Latin America and Christianity in the age of the internet, the virtual Christianity. So Christianity moves south and east. The history of Christianity into about 1600 tends to focus on developments in Europe. This tends to suggest, unfortunately, that Christianity is a European religion, which it is not. Christianity originated in the Middle East, but adapted itself remarkably well to the European context. Yet Europe is ultimately only one of a number of contexts in which Christianity is settled and developed. Other regional contexts include North Africa, parts of the Middle East, China, Korea, and Latin America. A recent book I read by a couple of professors from Fuller Seminary called American-Style Churches, Euro-Tribal Churches, because the structures and practices of most contemporary churches in the United States are inherited from our previous context in Europe. So I may continue to use that phrase. I kind of like it. The forms of Christianity planted in the European colonies bore a marked resemblance to their homeland. It was as if European church practices, architecture, traditions were parachuted into alien territory. As we noted earlier, most missionaries were far from being complicit in colonialism. Yet there was always a temptation for missionaries in Latin America and Africa to rely on what had been tried and true and tested in a European context. The First World War ended what is widely regarded as a great missionary phase of Christianity. That would be, of course, around 1917. This missionary enterprise was largely sustained by the Western churches, who sent missionaries into regions they regarded as unchurched. The post-war period saw a reduction in commitment to missionary work, partly for economic reasons and partly due to concerns about the international situation. To the surprise of Western missionaries, Christianity began to spread without them. Imagine that. As more indigenous forms of Christianity took root in parts of the world that had little contact with the Christian faith. A significant example of this was in China. After 1948, when the missionaries were expelled, the churches were destroyed and pastors were killed. and house church Christianity exploded and began to grow. Says something about leadership hierarchies, right? So there was a decisive shift to the global south. The numerical center of Christianity shifted decisively away from the West between 1900 and 2000. Christianity is now a religion of the global south. Population growth in these areas mean that an increasing proportion are Christian. Now, try to track with me on this example. It's pretty startling. In 1900, the population of Africa, that's the continent of Africa, was 10 million people. 10 million people. 9% of them were Christian. In 2005, the population was 400 million. From 10 million to 400 million. But the growth of Christianity far outstripped the explosive growth of the population, so that 46% of 400 million people were Christian in 2005. That is one of the most amazing statistics I have heard about, not only about population growth, but also the growth of Christianity as a religion. The styles of Christianity developing in Asia, Latin America, and Africa are noticeably different from those found in the United States, and even more different from those found in Western Europe. The Protestantism of the global South tends to be more charismatic or Pentecostal, generally with traditional moral values and little time for modernist modes of reading the Bible that dominated the West. This means that Protestant denominations of the global South tend to have more in common with each other than with their equivalents in the United States or Europe. African Lutherans, for example, have more in common with African Methodists than the African Lutherans have with Lutherans in the United States, despite the denominational link. Now let's talk about Arab Christianity in the Middle East. In the beginning of the 20th century, Christianity had established an uneasy but workable relationship with Islam, the dominant religious force in the region. The Ottoman Empire, of course, was the overarching authority in the Middle East, and it gave a significant degree of religious freedom to non-Islamic faith, such as Judaism and Christianity. Islam has always done that, considering Jews and Christians to be peoples of the book. By the early 19th century, the Ottoman Empire extended throughout the Middle East and deep into Persia. Christians were active participants in the renaissance of the Arabic language, often referred to as the Nahda. Christian scholars played a leading role in the development of the renaissance of the Arabic language, seeing it as a counterweight against sectarian tensions within the regions, which often led to communal violence. Unfortunately, along came the First World War and the Balfour Declaration by Great Britain at the end of the First World War. After the Ottoman Empire was defeated, the British declared, the Balfour Declaration came forth in 1917, and it created widespread discontent throughout the Arab world, which flared into open warfare with the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. These developments led to an increasingly politicized forms of Islam, some of which portrayed Christianity as the last vestiges of the Crusades in the Islamic region. The Coptic Christians of Egypt was the largest Christian community in the Middle East, suffered a huge loss in numbers following the revolution in 1952, which brought Gamal Abdel Nasser to power. Anxiety about their safety and future led many Copts to immigrate to Australia, Western Europe, or the United States. Western-led interventions in the region, such as the occupation of Iraq in the 2000s, were easily portrayed by Islamic fundamentalists as a Christian encroachment on Islamic lands. At the time in 2004, when there was the drumbeat of war building up to the invasion of Iraq, I heard a few of my conservative Christian friends talking about how bad Saddam Hussein was, and I pointed out to them that Saddam Hussein was the main wall of protection standing between Assyrian Christians and destruction in Iraq, because the Assyrian Christians were the ones that surrounded him and were his advisors because he trusted them. Saddam Hussein was more of a secular leader than he was a religious political leader, and was not particularly anti-Christian or pro-Muslim, even though he himself was a Muslim. After our invasion of Iraq in 2004, the presence of Assyrian Christianity in Iraq has almost disappeared. And now a similar thing has been happening in Syria, and may also happen in Iran. So, let's go to the east, to Korea. That was the decline of Christianity in the Middle East. Sad but true. Now let's talk about the amazing growth of Christianity throughout the 20th century in the East, in some places like Korea, Taiwan, China, etc. So here's a picture of Korean Christians praying. Korea, by the end of the 20th century, Korea has established itself as a largely Christian nation, with Protestantism, especially Presbyterianism, being by far the largest group. Yet in 1901, only a tiny proportion of Korea was Christian, about 1%. How did a country with virtually no Christian presence come to be a majority Christian nation? Christianity was known to some Koreans as early as the 18th century, when diplomatic links between China and Japan led to contacts with Catholic missionaries in the region. In 1603, a Korean diplomat returned from Beijing with books by Matteo Ricci, who was a Jesuit, Italian Jesuit. He's famous for having developed a memory technique known as the memory palace, which allowed him to accomplish amazing feats of prodigious memory that impressed the Chinese elites. Matteo Ricci. He was a missionary to China, by the way. The Catholic Church made significant inroads in China. This was because the Catholic Church actually made significant inroads in Korea, also in China. This is because the Catholic Church used Hangul, the phonemic Korean alphabet, rather than the aristocratic habit of using Chinese characters. So here is a picture of the Korean phonemic alphabet. Of course, this endeared Koreans to the Catholic Church for recognizing and giving a nod to their national identity, which is a similar dynamic that happened in Poland and Ireland. And in both Poland and Ireland were persecuted nations that saw themselves as being oppressed, but in Poland's case by Russia, or in the later the Soviet Union, and in Ireland's case by the English. And so the Catholic faith or Catholic religion became a rallying point for their national identity, and therefore thrived. And the same seems to be the case here in Korea. That Korea was tossed back and forth between China, and Japan. It was occupied by Japan, and the Catholic Church, using their phonemic Korean alphabet, was endeared Catholicism to the Koreans for reasons of a national identity. So although Catholicism was established in Korea by the 1880s, it was still a small number. Many scholars suggest that the serious growth of Christianity in Korea can be traced back to two American Protestant missionaries who arrived in 1884. Both actively promoted education as a means of embedding Christianity in Korean society. Some form of Pentecostal revival also appears to have begun in Korea around 1907 and was significant in bringing about conversions among the native population. Let me point out that 1907 was virtually the same time as the outbreak, just a year later, as the outbreak of the Azusa Street Revival in Los Angeles. Christianity and Chinese nationalism. Christianity came to be perceived as an ally rather than an enemy in Korea in the 20th century. In Korea, the major enemy of the 20th century was not the West but Japan. Korea was annexed by Japan in 1910 and remained under Japanese rule until the end of the Second World War. Unusually, Christianity came to be seen as being on the side of Korean nationalism, especially in the face of Japanese oppression. Throughout the Japanese occupation, Christians played an active role in Korean independence. They played a role all out of proportion to their numbers, actually. One example would be in 1911, there was a popular revolt against the Japanese rule. 123 people were arrested and tried for the insurgency by the Japanese. Of the 123 people, 98 were Christians. This was at a time that Christians made up just over 1% of the entire Korean population. That's a very dramatic number there. The significance of this point can hardly be overlooked. And so Koreans viewed Christians as patriots. Again in 1950, another major upheaval in Korea when Korea underwent a partition into a communist North and the democratic South following the Korean War. The heavy involvement of missionary agencies in the relief programs which followed the ending of the war created a powerful stimulus to the development of Christianity, which was further catalyzed by the Korean church programs of social action in the 1960s. So here's a picture of the division of Korea. And my cat is here to help me do this presentation. Let's see how that goes. So Korean Pentecostalism. Korea has been affected by the global expansion of Pentecostalism since the Second World War. The movement developed in ways that adapted to local environments, with the leadership rapidly passing from American hands to indigenous pastors. In 1952, the American Assemblies of God sent Abner Chestnut to Korea as their first missionary. The Korean Assemblies of God were organized in 1953 and opened its first Bible school during the following year. Paul Youngie Cho went on to become the founder of the Yoido Full Gospel Church. He was one of the first students of the school organized by the Assemblies of God. And the Yoido Full Gospel Church that he pastors at one time was the largest church in the world. The form of Pentecostalism that Cho developed was early influenced by Presbyterianism, which is the dominant form of Christianity in Korea at that time, and by worship traditions originating from the revivalist and holiness traditions. Okay, one more picture. There we go. That's the Yoido Full Gospel Church. So South Korea is now home to some of the world's largest Protestant churches, such as the Yoido Full Gospel Church, a Pentecostal church based in the Yoido district of Seoul, what probably the largest house church congregation, mega church based on house churches in the world. The church began in an ex-army tents in the slums of Seoul in 1958 with an emphasis on the transformative impact of the gospel and the empowerment of the Holy Spirit. Today, the church has a membership of 700,000. Its main place of worship can hold 25,000 people, so that forces it to hold multiple services on Sundays. And here you see people leaving their services, thousands of people. So I'm going to stop my recording here. Thank you very much, as always, for your kind attention. We have I believe one more lecture to finish our survey of 2,000 years of church history. And after that, I'll be moving on to some other topics and themes. But I hope you've enjoyed this. Please contact me if you're interested in applying for our certificate in Christian studies and any of the other things that we're doing in the religious studies department at FIU in Miami. Thank you. God bless. Take care. Bye.